Alright, welcome everyone. Class of the Noahide Nations on the Noahide laws. Again, I want to welcome everyone. This class of Noahide laws spoke last week about the connection with Sukkot and Hanukkah and what applies, what doesn't apply. Now we're going to speak about Tu B'Shvat. Now, Tu B'Shvat, the month Shvat falls after the month of Kislev. Now, there's only one holiday in the month of Shvat. That's Tu B'Shvat. Literally, 15. Tu means 15. And, spell it out in Hebrew, Tetzvav. Right, Tetzvav is 15. Right, the 15th of Shvat. But there's a question. There is a question over here whether this is going to be relevant or not to Noahide. So the Mishnah, Rosh Hashanah, chapter 1, Mishnah 1, which we've seen before Rosh Hashanah, and that is there are 4 Rosh Hashanah. There are 4 New Years. First of Nisan, we mentioned New Year for the King. New Year's for the King that they used to write documents. It's the first year of the King, second year of the King. Right, for the kings and festivals. For first of Nisan, the first month. Right, 15th of Elul is a new year for tithes and animals. For Rabbi Eliezer and Shimon, is the first of Tishrei, so difference of opinion. Whether it's the first of 15th of Elul or the first of Tishrei. First of Tishrei for counting years. Right, that's how we count years. The Jubilee, Shemitah cycle, tithes in the trees, in produce. And now to what's very relevant to us, and that is the first of Shvat, New Year for trees, according to the Yeshiva of Shammai, according to the Yeshiva of Hillel, from the 15th of Shvat. We normally go, there's a difference of opinion between the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. Normally we go according to the house of Hillel. There are certain cases we go according to the school of Shammai, but again, in most cases we go like Hillel. So as we mentioned, the halacha is we go like Hillel. When we see Tu B'Shvat, which is the 15th of Shvat, is the New Year for trees. Again, 2 means 15. Right? Tetzvav is 15. Every letter has a numerical value. Tes is 9. Vav is 6. 9 and 6. 15. Right? So what do we mean the 15th of Shvat? Now, what else does it mean over here? The number of tithes, agricultural tithes, given each year in the land of Israel. There were tithes depending on the 7-year sabbatical year cycle. Now, how does the cycle go? Truma Gedola, Ma'aser Rishon. First year was Truma Gedola, Ma'aser Rishon, Trumas Ma'aser, Ma'aser Sheni. Second year, Truma Gedola, we're explaining. Ma'aser Rishon, Trumas Ma'aser, Ma'aser Sheni. Third year, Truma Gedola, Ma'aser Rishon, Trumas Ma'aser, Ma'aser Oni. The 4th, Truma Gedola, year 4, Ma'aser Rishon, Trumas Ma'aser, Ma'aser Sheni. Year 5, Truma Gedola, Ma'aser Rishon, Trumas Ma'aser, Ma'aser Sheni. Year 6, Truma Gedola, Ma'aser Rishon, Trumas Ma'aser, Ma'aser Oni. The 4th. And year 7, Shemitah. That's a sabbatical year where it can't be worked. The land of Israel cannot be worked. Right? And it's a remission of debts. Now, okay, we're going to explain what all these things are. So what is Truma Gedola? First separation for a tithe that was given to the Kohanim, the priests of the temple. The minimum amount varied, right? It varied on what? Whether the owner is poor or not. Right? If he's poor, he got more. If he's healthy, he got less. let's say. Then you then you have Meiser Rishon. Right, the first 10. The Meiser means the 10. Right, Rishon means first. It's the size of the first 10. 1/10 removed after Truma Gedolah. In other words, you had the first separation was Truma Gedolah. And after that, you had a tithe of 1/10. And this was given to who? Given to the Levites. Then you have Trumas Meiser. In other words, from this Meiser Rishon, then you took a 10th. Right? So this Meiser Rishon, the Levites were obligated to 1/10, give 1/10 to the Kohen. In other words, they got 1/10. They had to give a 10th, which means the 10th of the 10th is 100. They had to give 100 of the total produce. And he had Meiser Sheni. Now this tithe, which is another 1 out of 10, right? It's another 1/10 of the remaining produce. It's separated only the first, second, fourth, and 50. Right? If you look at what we said before, that's how it comes out. Meiser Sheni, again, this other tithe comes out the first year, second year, fourth year, fifth. The sabbatical year. Again, it's a 7-year cycle. And I have Meiser Ani. Right? And this tithe is given to the poor, right? It's called Meiser Ani, give a 10th. However much, right, to the poor. Ani means poor. It was only given the 3rd and 6th year, right, of the sabbatical year cycle. This means the cycle. Now, let's keep in mind that something very important over here. The person may not satisfy the tithing obligation of 1 year with fruit produced in another year. And that's pretty crucial. You can't have fruit, from 1 year going to another year. You can't tithe from one to another. So for fruit trees, fruit-bearing trees, VI-Cheshvan marks the demarcation. The demarcation, 1 year and the next for the purpose of these tithes. Okay? So, I mean everything's done on this day, but it's a demarcation. Demarcation line. Now there are other mitzvahs involved over here that we have to understand as well. Right? And that is the mitzvah of Orla and the mitzvah of Neter Ravai, as it's known. Orla, the halacha is you cannot eat fruit yielded by a tree in the first 3 years. In other words, they take a tree, plant it in the ground, even if fruit would come the first year, or the second year, can't eat it. So the start of the 3-year period, when does it start? It starts on the 1st of Israel. When is the end of that period? Tu B'Shvat. That's about a third of the year. A third of the year, the tree's life. Okay, you got Tishrei. Let's see if I remember here. Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat. Right, 5 months. About a third of the year. Almost half the year, really. Right, but it falls after Tu B'Shvat. Meaning, if a person planted a tree before Rosh Hashanah, the fruit of those trees will be prohibited until the 3rd Tu B'Shvat. 3 years. You have 3 years before you can enjoy the fruit. What is Neter Ravai? Now, Neter Ravai is fruit produced by a tree in the 4th year. Right? Ravai means the 4th. Right? It means 4th. It's something that was planted in the 4th year. Or let's say better, produced in the 4th year. That is going to be similar to Meiser Sheni, where it can be eaten one place, Holy City in Jerusalem, or a person can redeem it and use the money to buy food to consume in Jerusalem. So, what do we calculate? How do we calculate over here? Tu B'Shvat is also used to calculate the 4th year for Neter Ravai. Now, what's the $1 million question? Or, let's say better, the $1.5 million question. A Truma Meiser relevant to Noahide. Now, it's clear they're not obligated in Truma Meiser. And all the halachic authorities, Rambam, favorite mitzvahs Hashem, mitzvahs Noah. All holds, and Noahide says no relevance. Right? Very simply, these are commanded to Jews. They certainly don't make universal sense. In other words, if you would ask, let's say the true kid's birth, the tree has fruit within the first 3 years, who's going to say you can't use it? That doesn't make logical sense. Right? So that wouldn't apply to a Noahide. Therefore, Noahide performance at best is voluntary. Right? But the Mishnah also applies in Truma. Mishnah in Truma, chapter 3, Mishnah 9. Certain applies it's voluntary, and if it's voluntary and they do it, okay, it applies. Mishnah there says, Truma of a non-Jew, for a Kutite, or a Kutian, it's Truma, it's good. If they did it, it's good. Ties of Valentine. And the sanctified gifts, that they sanctify something, it's good. But you see, they can do it. So the question is, okay, is the tithe itself rabbinic, or is it biblical? Now, if it's biblical, according to Torah, VI-Cheshvan significant also for Noah. If it's rabbinic, maybe not relevant to the whole. So here, most authorities are going to hold that a Noahide voluntary separation, certainly not from the Torah. Right? Certainly not from the Torah, and therefore it's rabbinic. What we're going to see in a lot of these things, not so clear. Comes on the Rambam in Trumas chapter 4, halacha 50. The Rambam explains why it's rabbinic. So he says when a Gentile separates truma for his own produce. Yeah, this only applies to the land of Israel. Let's make clear also. It doesn't apply outside the land. I remember a friend of mine told me a story. It wasn't by Truma Meiser, it was by sabbatical year, by Shemitah. The woman tells him he's on the flight, wherever he's going, and when asked him, I said, yes, no, I asked, hey, he said, I want you to know, 7 years, I separate, I don't work my garden or any of these things. So a friend of mine said, it was so interesting. Where do you live? Wherever you live, somewhere in the States. So he said, wow, that's so interesting. And you're probably aware it doesn't apply, outside of Israel. A little bit myth once you heard that. By Truma Meiser, taking tithes only applies in Israel. So if a non-Jew took Truma from his own produce according to Torah, it's ineffective. Why? Doesn't have an obligation. There's no obligation. Come on, the rabbis, they declare that a separation should be effective. Why? Because of the wealthy left the money belong to a Jew, instead of belong to a Gentile to make it exempt. So we're going to cross-examine this non-Jew who separates Truma. Now, if he says, I separated it, so it should be a Jew, it should be like a Jew's, what do? We give it to the priest. All right, that's valid. If not, it should be entombed, for perhaps his intent was he had to dedicate to heaven. Maybe he didn't want to give it to him. And maybe, it's going to be dedicated to heaven over here. When does this apply to the Rambam? The land of Israel. As we mentioned, the sages do not, however, issue a decree of Gentiles separates Truma in the outside of Israel. So we tell him he's not obligated. The produce is not Truma at all. What do we see? Right, so it comes on the Rambam, and he says the tithes of a non-Jew, whether they're acceptable, only acceptable in the temple because of the rabbinic decree. What's the rabbinic decree? To address the problem in the Jewish world. Why? What would be the problem? Because wealthy people would falsify. What would they falsify over here? They would falsify They would falsify ownership of their crops. That's what they would do. Sure, my picture's not coming up here. Anyway, they would falsify the crops, or ownership, let's say, and claim it belonged to a non-Jew. Why? Because they don't want to pay the tithes. Right? Very good. They don't want to pay over here. So what do? They'll say it belongs to a non-Jew. So they don't have to take tithes. Now, if a non-Jew came to voluntary offer, if they came and they wanted to voluntarily offer it, there was suspicion. Maybe he's pulling shtick. And he's always saying it belongs to a non-Jew, and it really didn't. Why? Because it belongs to a non-Jew. Guess what? He doesn't have to pay. 100% he doesn't have to pay. So what does the Rambam seem to hold? Rabbinic? Seems like he holds it's rabbinic. Now, Rambam commenting on the Mishnah, Trumos, chapter 3, Mishnah 9. What does the Rambam learn over there? It says non-Jews, even though they're not obligated, which we said, any separation or ties, they receive a little benefit by giving them. Therefore, they're valid. Now, what would that tell me? What would I understand? I would 100% understand that they're not obligated to Trumas and Mice. Right? They're not obligated. Right? But a non-Jew can separate them. And if he does, he gets a mitzvah. But certainly they're not obligated. But the Rambam seems to say and acknowledge that there's a biblical validity. Even though really not obligated could be, there is a biblical validity over it. Now, that being said, this, the Kedushin 41b, explains this is an ongoing dispute. And there are a number of possibilities how we can understand what's going on over here. First thing is, what's the Mishnah telling me? Mishnah says, same thing as the Rambam. Ties and separation of non-Jews, they're only valid for the rabbinic decree. So where's the disagreement over here? The Gemara says, but that's only relevant whether or not the validity of a non-Jew's truma is comparable to a Jew's. Right? Well, in other words, what's the case? What's the case we're talking about? The case is if a non-Jew is going to act as a Jew's agent, but it's not directly relevant for whether or not he can actually do it. Right? That's a totally different thing. In other words, we're saying like this. We're saying that the case is it comparable to a Jew for the purpose of acting as a Jew's agent? Now, what does that tell me about his obligation? We're asking if he can be an agent for a Jew, and if he did it, is it valid? But we're not saying, is it valid in general if he did it himself? Right? That's not relevant over here. At least not to this part. Now, second thing is, the Mishnah says on a biblical level, Truma and Meiser by non-Jews valid. Now, the Rambam would agree. You look at the commentary in the Mishnah, the Rambam would agree. But what the Rambam says in the Mishnah Torah, when it classifies the Jewish law over here, what's the question the Rambam's identifying? The question is, he's only identifying from the Jewish side of it. In a situation of doubt, what's the situation of doubt? Dishonesty. Right? So we're worried we can act as an agent for a Jew or not. But that doesn't tell me anything about the validity of a true Noahide separation from Meiser and Truma. Doesn't tell me anything. So the Talmud of Kedushin also may not be relevant. Same thing. What's it discussing validity, the purpose of agency? Sending him as a messenger. Right? In other words, you send him out to do this. The question is it valid? If a Jew sends out an non-Jew to take Truma or Meiser, Could be it's valid, but what does that have to do with a non-Jew taking Truma Meiser in general? Tell me anything. So, $1.5 million question, and that is, what do we do? What's the conclusion? Are the voluntary Trumas and Meisers of a non-Jew valid? Of the rabbinic decrees we mentioned the Rambam, or because it's intrinsically valid in and of itself? What's the answer? Not clear. But doesn't end there. Right? So why not? Because we're going to see. How do we Jews commemorate Tu B'Shvat? Many have the custom to plant trees on this day. The recent custom when it began late 1890. From Yaakov, which is an agricultural commune before the state of Israel. It was adopted in the early 1900s. Right, early religious Zionist movement became prevalent, Reform and Conservative movement. Right, what do you do? Reform and Conservative Jews do when they come to Israel? They plant trees. Why? I don't know. They plant trees so Arabs can burn them down. Right, the Arabs do a good job at that also. Right, but that's the custom. That became the custom. So Tu B'Shvat really not celebrated as a holiday in general. Right, other than we don't say certain supplications in our prayers because it's supposed to be like a sort of a festive day. But there's no commemoration. It's not like we're planting trees. We don't do that. Right, but some began to acknowledge in the Mid-Ages and the Middle Ages the quasi-ceremonial eating of fruit. Right, Rashi explains this commentary to Rosh Hashanah 14a. And Rashi asks the following question. Why is the 15th of Shvat, the New Year for trees, not some other day? Right, the Mishnah does not entertain any other day. I mean, it does. There's a difference of opinion. Right? It's the 1st or the 15th, whatever it is. But why not any other day? Now, the Gemara loosely connects Tu B'Shvat to the life cycle of fruit trees. Rashi illuminates over here, makes things much clearer. According to Rashi, what's Tu B'Shvat? It's an eternal process, begins with what? Within the trees of the world. What do they do on the 15th of Shvat? They began to draw their sap up from the roots, nourish the tree for the winter season. Now, what does that do in the vernacular? It marks the renewal of the life cycle of a tree. What's it going to culminate in? Fruits, eventually. All things being equal. So the Truma Meiser cycle is mostly inapplicable, right? And some remaining requirements of tithing also here in the land of Israel. But we don't give it to Kohanim today. Regardless, it would seem that this ceremonial fruit eating, what's an acknowledgement of physical process taking place on Tu B'Shvat. Meaning, you're not going to eat the fruits till later, obviously it's not going to be ready, right? But it's a continual process. Over the next few hundred years, there was a custom of eating fruit on that day through the land of Israel. It became more common, more widespread, more elaborate, eventually culminating into a standardized Seder. It was fixed by the Arizal, the Gloria, and the students, right? According to Kabbalah. When's the custom took on deep mystical significance? Right? In many places, man is compared to a tree. From the Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19, when you besiege the city for many days to wage war against it, capture it, you shall not destroy its streets. You destroy its streets by wielding an axe against them. Why? Because you can eat from them. But you shall not cut them down. Right? The tree of a field of a man is going to siege before you. So what's the language over here telling you? It can be read like this. A man is but a tree of the field. Could read it that way. So there are a number of comparisons between a man and a tree. Right? The Gemara says in Titus 7:8, Jeremiah 17 verse 8, also compares the righteous person to a tree planted by water. Also common in Psalms, in Russian, other sources. If it comes along, revise the Gloria, the Arizo, blessed memory. And he says these comparisons are much more than a parable. Or let's say a literary device. Goes on a much deeper level. What's the connection? It's the connection between the soul of Adam, first man, and all of mankind. And the original tree. Right? The direct connection, the original tree of knowledge. So you got man, what was the first command? Don't eat from the tree of knowledge. So they do this Seder for this meal. What does it invoke themes of? Story, repairing what? Spiritual damage caused by man's very early transgression. What's the first transgression? They ate from the tree of knowledge. What did the tree of knowledge do? Brought death to the world. That's what it did. Right? According to us, never should have been death. So this meal is trying to restore, trying to repair that spiritual damage. So if we look at Torah law, Noahide relation to Bishvat, what's the relevance? It's only relevant to voluntary Truma Meiser brought according to the agricultural calendar. But if you look at natural phenomena, like Rashi said before, and you look at Kabbalah, there's certainly enough connection or communication holiday using provides a glorious Seder. Right? So if a non-Jew wanted to tap in, again, repairing the world, they can also help repair the world. Right, as well. You know, interesting. Say over here the soul of Adam, we don't say the soul of Jews. So we're talking about all mankind. Doesn't all mankind, don't they have the ability to help fix up the world? True. You know, Noah wasn't a Jew, he planted a vineyard. Why did he plant the vineyard? Some say the tree of knowledge was a grapevine. Some say it was wheat, some say other things, figs. Right? So what did he do? He tried to fix up the sin, but problem is it got plastered. Other people in history tried to fix it up also. But without getting into all that, direct connection. Adam sinned from the tree. Adam, tree. Comparison. Okay. Again, who does Adam represent? Not the Jews. Adam wasn't Jewish. Noah wasn't Jewish. Represents all mankind. Boy, it's a good thing we're exclusionary. It's a good thing you believe it or not, you're frying out forever, like everybody else. It's all mankind. So that theme of this Seder, restoring, repairing spiritual damage, that can be for everybody. Right? That's caused by man's very early transgression. Mankind. Not just the Jews. Right? It's not Jewish. Right? So according to this, a non-Jew can participate. So what do people do? So I don't think I've ever been to one of these. But we eat, fruits from the land of Israel. Some people have pomegranates, have kiwis, they'll have other things, they'll have nuts from the land of Israel, dates, figs. I don't know if people are going to eat figs because it's very hard to check for bugs. But, some of the species from the land of Israel. That's pretty much how we commemorate it today. Again, there are a few penitential prayers we don't say. People eat some nuts and some fruit and dried fruit. That's it. Not very, wouldn't say it's like so exciting. Right? Again, I've never been to one of these seders. But I guess it's, there is what to be said for it. I'm not going to say no. Because it is a deep idea. So why can't a non-Jew partake? They should be able to partake. Why? Because it's about all mankind. So we're still trying to get back to that original point before Adam and Eve ate from the tree. The one time we did that is by Mount Sinai. And then Mr. S or something, whatever you want to call him, makes a picture of Moshe Rabbeinu like he's dead, and then sent the golden calf, and the world came back. We haven't got back yet. We haven't gone back to that yet. It's not till we have to wait for the Messiah to come in. But it's a pretty deep thing, so there is a direct connection. Right? There is a direct connection between this and on. Yeah, so that's about Tu B'Shvat and what it represents. Any questions on any of that? Oh, here we go. Any questions on any of that? Or any general questions? Okay, I did send you an answer about cremation. If you have any questions on that, let me know. Otherwise, we'll continue, next week. There should be a class next week. It's a fast day, but my fast will be over by this class, so I guess that shouldn't be an issue. If it's an issue, I'll send out a thing saying that won't be class. I don't see why not. Otherwise, I can sign out. We're having a good middle of the day or almost end of the day for me, and everyone have a great rest of the week.